Hello, and welcome to the Thriving Black Minds podcast, bringing ADHD into focus in the Black community.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alvin King, your host this evening. Joining us is a clinical psychologist, an advocate for research, and currently leads a nationwide community health study on ADHD and sleep in the pediatric population, Dr. Brandy Walker. Hi, Brandy.
Hi, Alvin. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing great.
So, Brandy, if you don't mind, can I go right into the first question?
Yes, let's go.
It's family dynamic, collaborating and building your support network. Where does family fit in when it comes to mental health amongst the African American community?
If you remember the old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. Two things, right? So the child who grows up as an adult still needs their village, but also it does take family. Now, the African American family, that looks really different across the board. Some of us, it's maybe that traditional nuclear family where it's actually mom, dad, a couple kids, or a handful of kids. But it could also be grandma. It could also be grandma and dad, or dad by himself. The family dynamic is quite different, but the need to enlist family support is still profoundly important.
In the context of ADHD specifically, how does the family dynamic play a part?
So when it comes to ADHD, we know ADHD is a diagnosis for the individual, but it impacts the family so significantly that it could be a diagnosis for the whole family. So that means when we're looking at treatment, our treatment should certainly treat the person with the most symptoms, but understanding that other family members could be affected. The likelihood of having sleep problems is anywhere from 50 to 70% for a child with ADHD. Well, that means that mom and dad will probably be affected too. And there may be a sibling who's also having challenges with sleep because somebody else in the room can't sleep. So when we're thinking about the diagnosis, we're thinking about who else is going to be affected in that family unit. If you have a child who's misbehaving, certainly that's going to cause some distress for the parent. If you have a child who is not doing well in school, that child is going to have some challenges with their own identity or their own self-confidence. But sometimes parents take that in personally. So just ensuring that parents get the resources and the support without blaming the child is important. And for an African American family, there's challenges with just accepting a diagnosis in the first place. And so because there's difficulty with accepting a diagnosis or acknowledging that my child actually does have a mental health condition, then that brings a whole litany of issues when it's not even accepted or recognized or acknowledged.
Why is family conflict higher when individuals in the family have ADHD?
So the diagnosis of ADHD, some of the symptoms can aggravate the next person. And we can just be honest. So you got somebody who's hyperactive. Someone who's got a whole lot of kinetic energy can be a bit irritating to someone who doesn't want to be bothered. Sometimes they run into issues with challenges socially or interpersonally. So that means it can create additional conflict in a home environment among siblings or among parents. So when we talk about the family system, having a diagnosis of ADHD is quite difficult to deal with or manage, particularly amongst the families of African Americans, because there's a lot of times other issues going on in the background, whether they're financial challenges or a parent not being able to be home to provide supervision and ensure a child is doing what they're supposed to do. Being African American with a diagnosis and just the trajectory of the African American family in terms of the challenges that they deal with as a result of disparity of resources or medical care is what makes it that much more difficult.
Are there strategies that parents can use to reduce family conflict?
Absolutely. It may be creating space. The space in a household, maybe one particular room may be for this, another room may be for that, using timeouts, deep breathing, relaxation exercises, coming up with schedules and regular routines. Children who have a diagnosis of ADHD do really well with routines and things that don't change so much. Parents having their own self-care strategies so that they're not overwhelmed. Parents being able to not utilize the diagnosis as a way to have resentment towards the child or additional anchor. So accepting the diagnosis, accepting that there's a genetic load to the diagnosis, and just acknowledging it as a condition that we will do everything we can to make better for ourselves and for the child versus there's something wrong with you and you got this problem and now we got to pay for it.
You said something about it taking a village. This next question for me is somewhat personal. Can you speak to your thoughts about collaboration and building a support network? And then how does this tie in with the family dynamic?
So the family dynamic could be a source of collaboration. So if there's an aunt that the child really likes and really appreciates and looks up to, then it may be really good to enlist that aunt to help with the support, being a part of that support system. You're just being, as a teacher or as even a person with a diagnosis, you're being intentional about building your village. As soon as we recognize that you just can't do it by yourself, that should empower us to find out who do we want on our Super Bowl team? Who's going to take us to the Super Bowl? And so you start identifying people who could really help you. Everybody may not help in the same way, but different people can help in different ways. So your Super Bowl team may be your math teacher, somebody you really like. It could be, if you're an adult, some professionals who you really can lean on at your job, or some really good friends. But the idea is that you have several people or a handful of people who can solidly help you kind of not just get through, but do well. Your Super Bowl team may look like you might have your doctor on there, your therapist. You might have a few mentors. The idea is just understanding that you need a village.
That question, you answering that, is really important to me because one of my family members has been diagnosed with ADHD, and it does take a village. While you are hitting on so many topics that I have been relating to, but didn't have the subject matter expert like yourself telling me this. So this is very helpful. Tell me, how can parents manage their own stress level so that it doesn't create additional stress for the children and teenagers?
So for a parent, they should have their own self-care strategies. They should integrate some type of deep breathing and relaxation because that just helps calm the body and the physical. They should have time for themselves. They should have other people, a part of their team, to help relieve some of the stress that could kind of maybe babysit for a couple hours, or drop the kid off and allow the child to play in some sports or some type of activity to give them a relief. Things like that. It's just being strategic with your time and making sure that your day has self-care type strategies. And a parent may need to go to therapy. Like, it's not a bad idea to join a parent support group or to have your own therapist or counselor, maybe reading some self-help books. Reading could be an outlet. Journaling is another way to kind of deal with some stress or emotions. There's a lot of things that a parent can do outside of building up that support system. The support system is still really profoundly important, but also self-care is the next thing.
I have to agree with you. I think self-care, it is very important. In order for you to take care of others, you have to be able to take care of yourself. So, Brandy, many professionals recommend using rewards as an incentive to encourage good behavior. In your experience, has this been effective when children exhibit oppositional behavior?
So a rewards, we call it a behavioral management plan or program. That is a way to help a child manage their behavior. Kind of setting up a rewards program, but being careful that it's not so much based on if you do the right thing, you get this, or do the right thing, you get this, that. You build into it a sense of self-worth. Sometimes it's about just complimenting a person, not so much on just doing a good job, but on their qualities and their traits. Like, oh my gosh, you're such a great thinker. You're such a problem solver. And when we talk about oppositional behavior, we're talking about things that children are doing in opposition. It could be arguing, yelling, fighting with a parent, being disrespectful. There's a book out there called Scream-Free Parenting, and it's when parents let the consequences basically do the discipline. So parents don't have to get into these screaming matches with a child and make all these threats. You kind of say up front what the punishment is going to be for whatever infraction. And then when that infraction occurs, follow through with the punishment. The punishment has to be timely and it has to be appropriate to whatever the infraction is. And it has to be something where the child is like, dang, I really just missed out on X, Y, and Z. So that's important. It's called scream-free parenting. That's a really good tool. Otherwise, behavior management programs are really good, but you have to be consistent. Got to follow through.
This actually brings us to a close. Are there 3 points that you'd like to share with our listeners?
As we were talking about managing the behavior, there's a lot of research into what we call fixed mindset versus growth mindset. This is the work of Carol Dweck, because it teaches people how to think about themselves, how to think about accomplishing tasks. Extremely resourceful for a child or adult who's dealing with ADHD. So that's one recommendation, is to Google that and see what you can find and learn about that. The second recommendation would be for a parent who is dealing with a child who's oppositional, is to consider what's happening in the learning environment, what's happening when they go to school, being intentional about building their self-worth and their self-esteem. So we call that intrinsic motivation, and really just looking into that and finding ways to build a person up. Third thing, as we're talking about the family dynamic, is a parent building a support system up now, or an individual building their support system now. No need to wait for things to get worse. You can start ahead of time, particularly while we're dealing with the COVID situation.
Randy, again, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Thriving Black Minds podcast. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Thriving Black Minds and Twitter at ADHD Black Minds.